Hello everyone, my name is Francesco Cipollone and we definitely live in interesting times. So today I want to comment on something that happened a couple of days ago. In 16th of July, Hugging Face was doing some operation to test and benchmark test open models against non-vulnerability to prove that from a vulnerability description I can generate an exploit and launch it. Now, they use frontier model, OpenAI with GPT 5.6 Soul that have been released fairly recent with a little bit lower friction element than Mythos and Stephanie Fable. And in this operation, the AI kind of escaped or kind of did what it was intended to do. That is fundamentally accessing the system, escaping the containment of the harness, going on the web, finding exploited credential, and testing it against live environments, and hence escaping the protection of a harness or the protection of the sandbox. So was the model doing what was not intended to do? Probably not, but it was right, and we have been debating about the model capabilities for so long, and the fact that us as defender are on the back foot of attacker. Now, this model actually operates in the way it was intended to operate. The challenge on this is more the permission that this model had. But let's take a step backward on the history. So Hugging Face have released the statement. Originally, they didn't release the statement of who and what model they were testing because they didn't have enough data, but then they disclosed the original model that they were using and how they were using. So OpenAI responded with an article on how the model was used, that it was intended to be a benchmark test, but then de facto escaped the sandbox and did what it was intended to do. Now, that is because of iteration. So the model called from a harness perspective and used in an iterative way will try to do and get to the goal that is intended to do, and the harness and the iteration of the model will recursively try to get to that goal consistently. And in this particular case, it did exactly that. Now, if you want to explore ExploitGym, there is a paper out from UC Berkeley that describe how to run this harness and the benchmark as well to run it, the model, the idea to scrape, generate, and figure out where the vulnerability is and how to attack. Now, this is exactly the philosophy that we apply in a safe and controlled way in Phoenix Blue on taking the vulnerability from the pure description that is fairly basic and then basically extracting root cause analysis, remediation, and detection methods, as well as taking the POC that are available and validating that those are actually exploitable against the advisory intelligence with inspection methodology. You can go dig deeper. Phoenix Blue is completely free for a number of use cases, but it provides you the full exploitation intelligence plus the capability to go and scrape and analyze with your own model or with the model that you want to detect if this vulnerability is exploited at scale. And then we have an API on the back that enables you to go and figure out a particular vulnerability, is it exploitable, and can we extract intelligence from the advisory, and can we prove that this advisory can be converted in a vulnerability. Now, the challenge with a lot of this is that you need a safe harness. We spend a lot of time in this kind of situation with Phoenix Purple, that is our agentic harness that operate with the same iteration, trying to understand if your code has a vulnerability and trying to go and exploit that vulnerability in a simulated environment, but in a safe environment without escaping the sandbox, because it's a simulated environment from inside out and has access to Phoenix Blue to get intelligence in a safe way without going and validating hypotheses. So they're two completely isolated systems that communicate with each other, but they don't basically expand their knowledge. Now there is the very remote chance that the agent will go completely rogue, but because we test this against Miasma Shai-Hulud, we are very familiar with this model going rogue or trying to be taken over, or the vulnerability trying to take over with a prompt injection, one of the world's top 10 for LLM, to try to take over the chat and trying to exploit the harness that is accessing the file by reading it. Now, if you develop your own harness, this is one of the main things that you need to be aware of, because as we've proven with Claude, there are several vulnerabilities in using -p and using authorization mode that lead a harness like Claude Code or any other harness that are even less audited to accessing and executing privilege operation. But in general, as the case has shown us in here, we didn't need to have that vulnerability and that exploitation. This went completely above and beyond in an automated way. So in conclusion, what should you do? Well, first of all, choose your right partner, choose the right harness, do a simulation scenario like this. Now, one specific caveat that Hugging Face did that I forgot to mention before was they tried to use OpenAI in a harness mode and in a full mode to analyze the vulnerability. But the problem is the guardrail that these models have put in place prevented them to validate what happened. And they had to resort to a custom loaded model in something like Bedrock or some other system or localized running version like GLM 5.2 that helped them completing the work. Now, this is the first escaping agent, an autonomous agent that goes rogue. And the interesting fact is that there is an AI agent that instead try to figure out what happened and trying to remediate. So it's the clear case of AI fighting AI, and is a clear example of the modern attack that we are facing. So is all doom and gloom? No, but it's a good lesson learned, I would assume. So what to do next? First of all, threat model your system, your environment. Are you subject to this type of attack? Lock down your harness against read access, execution modes, and sandbox escape, because those are the overprivileged system that will try to go rogue when they're allowed to. Treat downloaded model and untrusted data, and especially vulnerability data, as untrusted data. So don't give them access to anything else. Even though in this particular case, they didn't have access, they escaped the sandbox and they figured out a way to go outside. Now, there is a fine grain and fine line when you want to do research and you don't want to give access to a system. At the same time, you want to give them access to a system and the web to do research. So it's a bit of a fine line and a risk-based decision. So in conclusion, be careful with the data that you use, be careful with the harness that you use, and lesson learned from this particular event. This is Francesco Cipollone. We play with AI on a daily basis and with dangerous vulnerability on a daily basis with Phoenix Blue and Phoenix Purple. So if you want to test it out in a safe environment, those are the safe environment. But also we're happy to talk about this because we are stronger together talking about these problems and digging into on how you can prevent this happening in your system. Stay safe out there and trust the right model and the right harness. Goodbye.